All right, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I know many of you are finding this one of the later calls that I've done, especially for the African audience. But we wanted to do this because Iyinoluwa Aboyeji, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, has got a big contingent of followers across the pond over in the United States. So we decided to try something a little bit different. So thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. And on that note, as you are taking the time to join us at this time, please ask questions, get involved. I'm really, really hoping that many of you are going to be digging in and taking over this interview from me in some ways and putting your questions out there. That's one of the reasons why we do this. Anyway,
Amazing.
let's get with the introductions. So, co-founder of Andela and Flutterwave, founding partner of Future Africa, one of the most influential architects of in the tech ecosystem of startups. I think the only person on the African continent I know who's done two unicorns. A very warm welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here, Colin.
So let's just get stuck in. Let's go into the where I want to start. And quite often I'll go through and we'll sort of do your bio and we'll, kind of walk through that journey of how you start. I don't want to do that this time. There's a lot of content out there already, and maybe we'll get a bit of time to go and explore those journeys, at a later point. I want to start kind of now. You've got behind and co-founded Future Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about what Future Africa is and what the aims of it are?
Yeah. So Future Africa is essentially an innovation fund which partners with founders that are ambitious for society to turn our society's biggest challenges into global business opportunities. Our core belief is that when you empower founders that are ambitious, and mean well for society with the capital, with the coaching, and with community that they need to be able to build the future from Africa, you could get incredible outcomes. And we've seen some of those outcomes in our 10 years of investing in African companies. We've managed to co-build some of these companies with these amazing founders. We've had the good luck of building companies that are $1 billion at least twice, and we have a couple others that are on their way there very quickly. And I think overall, we've learned so much about what it takes to really help founders to be able to go on that journey from zero to $1 billion in valuation, $100 million of revenue on the African continent, which is quite different from doing it anywhere else in the world. And we're very lucky to be in the position that we're in.
And why did you start to do this? I mean, after your first couple of ventures, you could chosen to have done anything at all, including put your feet up and just enjoy the beach. Why did you decide to get involved in something which, from an outside perspective, is perceived, I guess, to be risky and certainly requires a massive amount of your time and effort?
I think for us, what we quickly realized was that it's one thing to build one unicorn or two, but only the scale of the problems that Africa faces and the opportunities that they represent are just so massive that you would need a billion unicorns to take, if you feel such a thing, to take care of them. Just because what everybody sees and what is possible are just so wildly different. I mean, Africa is a continent that has a median age of 19, right? Which means of the continent's population of about 1.3 billion people, right? More than half of that population is under the age of 19. Now, some people look at that and say, interesting, that's a hopeless situation. Some people look at that, like myself, and say, well, that's the future workforce of the world. And we have all this opportunity to teach them how the new world works, right? Because the question is, anybody can tell that the world over the last the world over the last 30 years or 50 years looks very different from the world, before that, right? I mean, 50 years ago, we're just getting the personal computer, right? And just think how rapidly different the world is from personal computers. So you have this ability to train a new generation of young people on artificial intelligence. You have this new opportunity to train you can have a super humans, quite literally. because they're able to use man machines and viruses to create brand new things at a scale that was previously unimaginable. That's the prize for fixing education in Africa with this youth population. But it's going to be very difficult for many people around the world to see that kind of opportunity. Many people around the world are just going to see poverty and youth and all that. And I remember the early conversations when I was studying. Um, People would talk about how Africa can't build unicorns. We have to be content with building some other kind of animal, zebras, donkeys, horses, I don't know, whatever. And I was like, well, there's nothing different about Africa versus the rest of the world. If the rest of the world can build unicorns, Africa most definitely can build unicorns. And it took us basically making that possible more than once for people to believe us and for that to now become a normal part of the lexicon in Africa. So this is a continent where people just believe our challenges are just challenges, unsolvable challenges, and that they're best served by making money off the challenges or, continue to vilify governments who usually don't have the capacity to really solve the problems. But our point of view at Future Africa is that we have to prove that Africa is capable of solving the world's biggest problems,
Mm.
starting with
Do you,
Africa, where they are.
what Why do you, I mean, what's your take in terms of how those opinions have changed? Because, obviously you've created two unicorns with Andela and Flutterwave, and you've just said maybe we can dig into that later, that the venture capital and PE involvement that you have is seeing some, nice progress. On this series, we've been lucky enough to interview the founders of a whole bunch of other unicorns, the MNT Hallen, for example, Go One, Melvin Lebecker. I think he was a
Hmm.
founder at the age of 28, which is just ridiculous. Peter de
Hmm.
Villiers with Click, Time Bank just recently raising a couple of $100 million with, the South African bank, their new bank, getting involved. So it seems to me that the external overseas interest in Africa is improving, that they're starting to have a bit more belief in the opportunities here. But is that, I suppose, just me being a little bit overly hopeful and just picking a couple of things? Look, just what it's like. What are you seeing? Are we getting more interest, say, from the US?
Look, I would say we're getting some interest, but not entirely in the right things. There
Right.
is still a large contingent of investors whose prism for looking at Africa is, this is the Silicon Valley light. But, Africa just has a whole different bunch of problems and opportunities as a result of that problems. For example, there are very few Silicon Valley investors who want to invest in infrastructure. But if you look at India, for example, India's tech ecosystem only took off after they were able to have from Geo an investment of about $35 billion in fiber. In
Mm.
Nigeria, it costs a lot less to rig this country with fiber, maybe $3 billion at most. Yet people wouldn't invest $3 billion in fiber in Nigeria. People wouldn't invest in data centers, even though Africa is the most energy rich region in the world. We have hydro, we have gas, we have, if you want gasoline, we have solar, more so than anywhere else in the world. So there is a sort of unobjective evaluation of opportunities. And you can see it every day that rather than go for profitable opportunities, a lot of the capital around the world is just barely investing. And you know what? One of the things that's surprising about even the just barely investing is that for every dollar that has gone into African technology, we have produced more unicorns than almost every other region in the world, bar none,
Yeah.
which is extremely surprising when you consider the level of education and talent, when you consider the state of infrastructure, when you consider the level of incapacity that the government has. So it's almost like this is an opportunity that's just sitting there, but people are literally willing themselves to see it.
Look, I mean, I think I listened to an interview of yours earlier. I read something that someone had written. I can't be 100% sure. We're going to find out in a minute whether it's exactly what you said, but it was along the lines of DFIs aren't coming back, global investors aren't coming back. Do you still hold that view? And if that's true, how should people looking to go and fund startups, to go and fund scale ups, approach capital raising here on the continent? It feels like they need to have a different model than what you might apply over in the US.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say I still hold the view that, I mean, maybe they might want to come back, but the reality of the matter is they wouldn't come back in the way that they did between 2018 and 2022. That was a moment in time. And I think all over the world, that was a moment in time. What we're actually seeing on the ground is that DFIs are cutting their commitments to Africa, both in terms of aid and in terms of investment. Global investors are being particularly cautious because they can throw billions of dollars at OpenAI and building data centers all over the world. Why would they come to Africa? There's barely any development there. But I think this is the biggest miss, right? Because at the end of the day, there is an opportunity, there's real organic demand in Africa that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Everywhere else, you have to contrive demand because populations are aging. And as people age, they care a lot less about the kind of things that all these companies are investing in. On the other hand, you've got a whole bunch of young people who see there's a future ahead of them and are starting to adopt this technology at a ridiculously fast rate. That's something that you can't replicate anywhere else in the world. And that's why most of the world's making it completely unfair when they're trying to bet outside of Africa. And that's why we are making the bet on Africa, because we recognize that this might be the most asymmetric bet in the world.
What does Africa need to do to really unleash, the talent that it has? You are working with many organizations. I think you were saying before we just came on, you've just come from a government meeting. You work
Yes.
with United Nations, and obviously you've got access to some incredible people because of your past experiences. What do you think that they collectively and we here on the continent need to do to really take this, I don't know, 500, 600, you know, I don't know, I mean, numbers are crazy, aren't they? I mean, we're going to be sitting there, what do you think, a million people who are, you
Yeah,
know, at the age to work and to go and
yeah,
support everything on the continent and offer their services for the overseas market where we've got all the people starting to come up to retirement and in desperate need, for workers. It feels like that's a huge opportunity, and yet somehow we're getting in our own way.
absolutely. I think it's kind of sad because a lot of the governments don't have the agency to do very much. But again, I can't make that excuse for my own country. I don't know about other countries. And so the event I actually just came back from was the 3MTT Impact Summit. And over the last 2 years, 3MTT has trained over 150,000 young people, right? And basically, it's the largest talent accelerator program in the entire world with a target of 3 million young people. And it's fully trained 150,000 and it's got a bunch in the pipeline. And that's what governments need to be doing. They've got to be using their bully pulpits to get more and more and more young people into the digital economy. Failing that, they're going to have a tough time because the reality is they can't build airports fast enough. They can't build fast routes fast enough. They can't build power fast enough. They can't build roads fast enough. They can't build agricultural farmlands fast enough. As much as they might want to do all of that, the only thing they might have a fighting chance at doing is to be able to train young people to go into the digital economy as a first step. And now, after that, and that's what we've seen with some of the programs that we've done in the past, like Andela. We've got Andelans who are into importing and exporting. We've got Andelans who are into solar energy. We've got
Mm.
Andelans who are into procurement. And they're able to use the technology prowess and skills that they've learned to actually now be able to fully develop their countries because, computational thinking is a way of thinking. it's not
Yeah.
just it's not just a bunch of skills and coding. It actually teaches you how to solve real problems because the only way to get involved in technology is to solve problems and build. And I think that's one thing that governments are missing. Now, I'm not a single bullet guy. At the end of the day, one thing that we all have to realize is that until our governments start to prioritize the human capital above the ground over the natural resources below the ground, our continents are going nowhere. Because the only reason why the rest of the world can take minerals from Africa is because they know something we don't. And until we know what they do, we're never going to be able to create more value, no matter how many, you know, patriotic edicts we come up with. We're never going to be able to create more value from the same raw materials as the rest of the world can, period.
Mm. Do you think we need to send more of our sort of young adults, our sort of early 20s, guys and girls overseas, to actually go and create a larger diaspora? I see this from China. They deliberately send, as their educational process, hundreds of thousands over the last couple of years of their population to the US to go and learn. You could go and put it as a quote and take ideas. I'll use take, not steal, and take them back to China. That was the old China.
Well,
Now they're way ahead of the US in the advancement of
exactly.
tech. They're not doing copy paste anymore on Google and Twitter. They've got the engineers and the machine learning experts that are developing their own technologies, which the rest of the world is looking at in awe and just wondering how to go and replicate. Just the backstory to that is the last time, it was a few years ago, but the last time I was in Lagos for
Hmm.
work, I was amazed how many people I was dealing with in senior leadership positions in the companies that I was working with who had done exactly that. They'd been across to the US, been to universities, whether it was for 6 months or 3 years, and all of them were super excited about Africa and Nigeria. Every single one had been over there for 5 or 10 years and then decided they wanted to come back home. They wanted to bring their knowledge back in, and they were investing heavily into building new companies. Is that a viable option that we should be trying to lobby our governments to try to do, or is that just a crazy idea?
Well, I have a more nuanced view, which is that it is an expired option, right? At the time when China was sending um, people to the United States, we didn't have the plethora of knowledge that we do now. The reality right now is everything that you would learn from Harvard or going to anywhere is between AI and YouTube. You got it.
Mm.
You really don't have to make that trip.
But isn't it
And
isn't it more than that though? Isn't it that we need to build the networks? Because at the end of the day, as you're saying, knowledge is being democratized. A lot of the work we're doing is being automated, but
well, we
actually, it's
built the
the
networks online, Colin. I'm talking to you. We've never met.
yeah, that's
So
true.
we're friends. So we don't need to do that. I think, we're locked into an old model that is expired. There is nothing we want to teach our young people that if we had connectivity and if we invested in infrastructure for learning, right? And we had the right kind of applied research capabilities, we couldn't do right here. And
Mm,
we still have our 17 million diaspora who've already been going out for the last 60 years. Surely they've gone out and gained some knowledge that they can bring back home. We don't need more of them doing that. In fact, right now, we have second generation Nigerians who are as accomplished as many of the first generation Nigerians who can bring this knowledge back home. We don't need to export more. And again, this is not to say that if people want to leave the country, we're a free country. Anybody can do whatever they want to do, and people already are doing it. But I think thinking of that as a critical path to developing the kind of knowledge depth that we need as a nation to be able to build things to solve our problems is unnecessary.
mm,
Many of the most impressive founders, including people like Tosin and Iyinoluwa, never left the country. And they've built some of the most impressive business. In fact, I would wager that the people who never leave the country have a much better understanding of the people of the country and aren't trying to impose Silicon Valley models on the rest of us than people who left the country. And in fact, I'll say in my own personal experience, everything that I know about business today was because I spent 2 years, quite frankly, living amongst real people who I didn't go to school with,
yeah.
understanding the culture. Everything I learned in Canada was pretty much useless to me the moment I stepped off the plane.
What do we need to do to go and give people more experience in this space? I mean, it strikes me that corporates are not going to be the growth engine of Africa. They're nice to have, but they're stable. I think the last time I looked at the statistics of corporates and employment generation, it's kind of flat. For the people they employ, it's offsetting the people that have actually departed. And as companies grow, other companies shrink, and we end up with a fairly sort of stable relationship. But when we look at the startups and the entrepreneurs and the small
Yeah.
and medium enterprise, that's the growth engine. And it feels like in many parts of Africa that that growth engine isn't being stimulated correctly by governments and local entities.
Yeah, I think the reality of what's going on, to be very honest with you, is that the corporates, between the corporates and the DFIs who like to cushion the corporates and the governments who are being encouraged to cushion the corporates because of business environment. The reality is a lot of the corporates are exporting jobs, right? And just being subsidized to stay exactly the same. They aren't being forced to innovate. They aren't being forced to actually come up with new things that can make the lives of the average person in their country better. And anytime the government tries to be on the side of the people, there's this uproar from private sector who basically want to remain in their cushy positions. And the
Yeah.
truth is, government just needs to ensure a free and fair market where no one gets subsidized. Let's take my country, for example. The moment that the government stopped subsidizing the oil industry and we had a very competitive sector, not only the government revenues shoot up, a lot of the existing players just simply couldn't survive. And now we have one of the most rapid development of electric charging, electric vehicles, and solar charging in the country. Startups only get a chance when problems are allowed to fester for long enough to become something somebody has to solve.
Yeah.
And that's what our governments have to understand. If they continue to intervene in the markets and save big companies with their corporate socialism, saving companies like Orange, which should disappear, or, these companies are old and defunct. They should be innovated out of existence. But we don't let them go anywhere because the government continues to subsidize them, government continues to coddle them, government doesn't force them to innovate. And that's what we need. We just need governments to ensure a competitive regime.
Tell me what you're seeing in the startup market at the moment and what patterns you're seeing. In the US, it's very clear when you look at Y Combinator and their peers, if it doesn't have AI in it, they're not interested. There's just 100 focus. What are you seeing across your portfolio and the companies that come to you to go and look for support?
Well, I think the consensus position in this part of the world is fintech.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's it's
But we
it's
need to do
mostly.
more than fintech. It can't all be fintech. Come on.
Well, I don't subscribe to that. Even as I built one of the biggest fintechs on the continent, it disgusts me that everybody just wants to invest in on-ramp, off-ramp payments, and then maybe they
Yeah.
sprinkle a little bit of blockchain on it. It pisses me off. And the primary reason why that is because all of them are on subsidized TFI capital, right? So they don't actually have to think about solving real problems. They just kind of follow the herd. You see what I mean? Now, when you have truly competitive private capital in the scene, then you have to solve real problems like education, like connectivity, like healthcare, and we're seeing bold founders who have a lot of experience in the industry coming out and saying, look, I'm tired of sitting on things that could solve real problems. I want to break out and, start a business that truly disrupts the sector that I have unique customer insight into. Those are the founders we're working with. We're not working with the fintech copycats. We're working with those founders. But what we're learning is at the end of the day, the sector is greatly hampered by its lack of infrastructure at a very basic level, right? Connectivity has to improve, right? In a country like Nigeria, you have barely 45,000 kilometers of fiber. And in a country like Brazil, with a similar size, you have almost 500,000 kilometers of fiber. It's not possible for you to build a neo bank, or when most people don't have access to the internet, it just wouldn't work, right? There's a lot of work to do on the infrastructure layer because that expands it. Even startups don't even have office spaces here. Most of us work out of homes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So these are the real challenges that the startup ecosystem is having. And it's going to take a big, bold government to go out, launch out, and create the infrastructure that the ecosystem needs to be able to do its work. And then after that, we can now even start talking about policy changes and so on and so forth. But there's a lot of work to be done there. I also think personally that the big tech companies ultimately, with respect even AWS, they are not investing with the right way in emerging markets because they're running away from doing infrastructure. They're
Yeah.
overtraining and undercapacitating the ecosystem. And what ends up happening is you train people and they leave to other places that have infrastructure. They need to start thinking about building more foundation infrastructure at a deep level. I know they do subsea cable and stuff like that, and I like it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about really embedding themselves into the ecosystem in a deep way. And the reason why is because, look, whoever does it is going to win the market because the vast majority of the world's global workforce, and that's because the world is becoming a global workforce, is on the continent. And anybody who doesn't teach those people how to use their tools will simply not survive.
Mm,
That's
interesting.
just the fact. They won't survive because, I mean, Microsoft, for example, has had an incredible 30-year run in Africa because they came in really, really early and they spent a lot of time teaching in universities and building infrastructure. Google had a run as well when they brought in Google developer groups. But many of the new players aren't understanding how important it is to center around talent development.
Yeah.
And until they realize that, I think they're going to struggle, especially given the kind of skill at which talent is being developed.
E, you're talking about the Western companies there. I mean, here in South Africa, we've got AWS building their first data center. A lot of guys use Terraco, but the obvious guys to also talk about are looking east and thinking about Huawei.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and then do you have a view on that? Because this to me at the moment we are in a situation where the majority of the world, when surveyed, believe and trust in China more than they do in the United States. And we're certainly in a world where China have more interest in Africa than the US do at the moment. Are you seeing um, lots more activity in that space where they're actually coming in and providing assistance
Yeah.
or looking for to go and build this infrastructure?
Well, there is some assistance, but realistically, the reality of a China is that they're very mercantile in their approach, right? So they're not necessarily looking for you to build infrastructure with them. They're looking for you to build infrastructure for them, or
Yeah.
they want to build for you, right? They're not going to work with you. And there's a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier. Personally, I'm not bullish on either the US or China being major players in our development. I'm actually more bullish about peer countries like India, like South Korea, like Mexico. These countries are the countries that we're going to develop off of the back of, in my opinion,
Mhm.
because they're coming in with very collaborative models and they want to do stuff. I think the US is still a great force for good in the world. I'm definitely relating my own biases, but the honest truth is, you know, the leadership has a knowledge gap about Africa, and somebody has to fix it. But that, I mean, that's not really our problem to fix in Africa. That's really their problem to fix in talking to the right people on the continent. But I'll tell you this: regardless of what the rest of the world does, east or west, we face forward. So we're going to develop whether or not the West likes it. And quite frankly, I actually prefer a model where we just do what's best for us,
Yeah.
because everybody's distracted or confused, um, um, or determined to just focus on their own interests, because that's where we need to be. Africa has to come of age. Africa has to do for itself. Africa cannot continue to hope somebody else brings a solution to Africa. Nobody will develop Africa but Africans. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to develop Africa but Africans. So at the end of the day, I'm actually very encouraged by the fact that we're being forced to make hard decisions and build whatever partnerships we need, but we're also looking inwards and having real hard conversations about what we need to build. And you're already seeing it. It's happening in the petroleum space. Nigeria bit the bullet and we built one of the largest refineries in the world, period. Right? Our government couldn't do it. Our private sector could, period. There's going to be a lot more of that across the board
Yeah.
and I hope perhaps with more partnership with government, but with or without partnership with government, the opportunity is there. And so it will be done.
Timely question from Karabo here. My question is, how do we get ourselves to a point where we build infrastructure at the same scale or the scale that we need to build it at?
I think the first thing is we have to work on our minds. Africans have naturally been trained to think small. We don't recognize that in a continent where you have 800 million young people, 700 million young people under the age of 30 in a world like this, it's a mostly digital world. You're the major potential consumer of technology globally. So
Mm,
you have to bet on yourself. We have to think big to bet on ourselves first. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to prove that potential. And until we do the mind work, then we can find partners that can get us to where we want to go. Because the rest of the world is pretty clear about what they want. They just want more revenue. They're not asking for too much. They want a market where they can sell their products. That's it. And we are that market, but we have to believe we are that market and build in partnership with those partners. You see what I mean? So we can
yeah,
prove out the market opportunity. Until we do that, until we have that mind work where we're not building things at subscale anymore, we're looking to build the biggest in the world, the biggest fiber network, Pan-African fiber network in the world, the biggest talent hubs in the world, the biggest tech hub. Until we're willing to make that happen, we're just going to keep things small.
yeah.
And we're going to continue to remain potential, potential, potential. But if we don't bet on ourselves, no one's going to bet on us for us.
Do you see um, opportunities for, or how are the opportunities in your mind? So let's just go through a couple. So firstly, there's things like Starlink, which look to be opening up a huge amount of potential for internet
Yeah, but
access.
it's a subscale solution. Look, with all respect to Elon, fantastic,
Yeah.
solve some problems in particular, circumstances, war zones, whatever. But nobody's going to develop a modern digital economy on Starlink. Perish the thought. If you don't have
Well,
fiber,
it certainly
you
puts you in a very
cannot build it.
dependent. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah?
No, I
You
mean,
just can't.
sorry to interrupt you there, but I mean, the obvious, and I suppose the obvious issue that comes on the back of putting a dependency on something like Starlink is exactly that. You have a dependency. And as
Yeah.
soon as you have a
Yeah.
dependency, you are renting and you are having to spend and pay. And as soon as you're spending and paying, then it's very difficult to break out of just being an earner, a wage, a worker, to actually get into a situation where you can have capital and ownership of property and your own sort of destiny.
Precisely, Colin. And the reality is, it doesn't even work for us. I wish it was a solution that worked for us, then we can even talk about it. But it doesn't even work. I have Starlink. When it rains, I can't use it. You know what I mean? Like you can't build a digital economy. It rains here 50% of the year, for God's sakes. It just won't work. You know, it's not a solution. It's not.
Okay, let's move away from the sort of geopolitical and the sort of big ticket items and go back to some of the other themes. I was particularly interested to pick your brains on that startup funding market because
Mhm.
we seem to have a different funding requirement than the rest of the world. So projects here, they may or may not have the same percentages of success, but where we do seem to struggle is that the timelines that you need to have money invested before you're going to get your returns as a VC are a lot longer as a starting point. And then secondly, the secondary and third sort of raises, the subsequent raises where you're either able to exit or double down, are not as liquid as you might like them elsewhere. Sort of, to me, I wonder whether we therefore have to go and encourage our startups to look at slightly different funding models to what they would be doing if they'd be sitting in the kind of startup hotbeds overseas.
Well, my honest opinion is a lot of what we call patience, right, is just failure that we have refused to acknowledge, and we're kicking the can down the road. Um, Look, I have a rule with all the startups that have actually returned capital on. If we don't get the money back in 5 years, we're never getting the money back. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
That's what we've seen. We've been doing this for 10 years, so we know a little bit about it. And I think at some point, we all just have to sit down, have a come to Jesus moment, look at the books, and say, hey guys, it's been 10 years. We've given you a lot of time to bring back the money, and you're not performing. And this is the biggest problem with African capital is that it doesn't bend to performance, it bends to relationships. We don't
Right.
have anything like a Midas list. We don't have anything, the process by which people are given allocated capital to invest is very relationship based. It's not based on any kind of performance, right? I, as a VC who has three unicorns in my portfolio, probably raised less than, $40 million dollars in my lifetime from a fund perspective, right? Doesn't matter, right? And the truth is, the second issue is that at the end of the day, I agree. The funding model is not particularly well suited to Africa, but not in the sense that most people think. It's not suited in the sense that we don't have friends and family here who can afford to fund startups at the earliest stage. The biggest struggle most startups have is going from zero to their first $100,000 in revenue. And quite frankly, there is no funding for you there that is commercially driven. You don't have a credit card. You don't have an SBA loan. So a lot of businesses that could have started by really serious people, they just realize, look, I just can't afford to take the risk that my child can attend school, that my daughter, my kids can feed, that I can't put a roof over my family's head. So they should stay in corporate and they waste away there. If governments are serious, we got to create a new kind of product where everybody can have access to programmatically to at least $15,000 of credit. And they can start a business of $15,000 of credit. And you know what? If they can't show evidence that they can make something happen with 15,000 or 50,000 or 100,000, I don't think they ever will. But right now, we have all these huge single operators, right? Once you go past the $25,000 grant, you're getting into the 100,000, 500,000, $1 million. Of course, people are going to stumble because they haven't really built the business organically the way they should. They're using money to do all the things that they should be using their knowledge to do.
Mm. When you're
So,
looking at, sorry, carry on, carry on.
no, no. So I think, and then finally, the reality is we haven't done enough on the talent for us to warrant even the level of success we're experiencing today in entrepreneurship. Because if you're a business and you're scaling, where do you actually find the talent that can help you scale? Nowhere. You can't find, we don't have the talent base to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. The companies that have succeeded are either themselves talent bases or they've had to, in a proprietary way, develop the talent base to be able to scale their business. But that's not sustainable. If we don't have talent ecosystems that can feed the entrepreneurial ecosystems, we're never going to be able to make the returns that we hope we should. So there's a lot of putting the cart before the horse in Africa when it comes to funding.
You said government there a couple of times. Is it your view that really this does require governments to intervene? I mean, if we're going to go and
Yeah.
do entrepreneur loans, this isn't something that you think we can do with private capital or organize ourselves as groupings of course, perhaps the corporate balance sheets, which are underutilized in this space to provide on ramps to people. Do you think it actually does need a government incentive to get this up and running?
Well, look, my point of view is that governments are good at one of two things. They're either good at catalyzing new ideas or scaling problem ones. The messy middle is for private capital, right? So I personally think that the idea that you can build a unicorn has been proven. And we've got a bunch of companies and foreign funders to thank for that. But we got to give more people an opportunity to do it. And the truth is, government cannot do it alone. Government has money, but doesn't always have capacity. That's the reality. And this expectation in Africa that government will do everything is kind of insane because government just has money. Like, have you ever met a government official? They can't run a business. How would they know who to give money to?
Yeah.
So I think we kind of have to give government, we entrepreneurs have to figure out a solution to our problems and then go to government and say, here's where you come in.
So
Failing that, we're wasting our time.
the obvious next question there is this a crusade that you've embarked on yet to bring yourself and a bunch of your successful colleagues together to look to see if we can set up some sort of equivalent of a sovereign fund in a particular country, but specifically to go and back the ecosystem and to do it directly with freedom and not having to be, you know, kind of withheld
Well,
by terms of what you're able to actually do. Can you envisage
well, in
something like
Nigeria,
that?
we've done that, right? In Nigeria, many years back, I at my own risk and cost, wrote in partnership with Steers at the time, a report for the NSIA about investing in venture capital. And off the back of that, the NSIA is pretty invested in a lot of venture capital in Nigeria. And more recently, the put a lot of input into the iDice program, which just funded a Nigerian GP. So in Nigeria, where I have a passport and I have some say, we're trying to make it happen as a community.
But it
And we've
sounds like
built a
we need
startup act.
it sounds like we need to 10x or 100x to really scale
We
this.
do, that's the thing. Everything in Africa is subscale, period. And the reason why things are subscale is because we lack ambition for society as a people. It's actually not about the government. Left to the government, they want to do 10 times. But our people don't have ambition for our societies. And unless that mentality changes, government is a politician driven thing. So they're not going to do more than, and I think our elite also have a lot of say and sway, but they're very self-involved and self-interested. The reality of it is, you can look up Tony Elumelu. He gave out $5,000 grants in exactly the same way I'm talking about to over 100,000, if not a million entrepreneurs across Africa. So this is validated. It can be done.
Yeah.
There's data to show that it works. So the reality is, unless our people have the ambition for society and they can prove our governments in that direction, nothing's going to happen.
That's interesting. It also feels like it's not just about a lack of ambition, it's just the experience. Because, if we look back in time, you have to remember there was once a time where there was no such thing as Silicon Valley. And so
There was.
they've been running since what, the 50s, building this model, which has taken time, which they now trust, but they've had, what is that, 80 years of basically creating this environment, which they now buy into and they believe in and they trust and they've
But
got
Colin,
model.
but Colin, then what do you say about Singapore? What do you say about South Korea? What do you say about China? Look, the excuses have to stop.
Yeah.
Yes, it took Silicon Valley, well, however long, but it doesn't have to take us that long. There's a lot of lessons that we've
Yeah.
already learned. We just gotta get, roll up our sleeves and get some work done.
Yeah. And I think just watching the way that you're talking to me and the expressions on the face, we need more advocacy. We need more people like you having conversations like this to go and encourage people who do have balance sheets to actually come and step out of their offices and get involved. Because I agree, the evidence is there from the last reports that I see. We've got continual success stories. We've got great data, which is showing that, we back businesses. Yes, of course, some fail, but many, many of them, and in fact, above average compared to some of the overseas metrics, succeed. They make money. You give people the
Yeah.
right incentives. Incentives drive the behaviors that we want. And so it feels like we're needing more of you to actually get around to go and encourage more people to get involved in this. Are you happy with, and I suppose there is a question there, are you happy that we're seeing progress in various organizations actually starting to become these voices to encourage some movement in this space?
I think for me, I see a lot of talking. I don't see enough doing. And that's the part that frustrates me. A lot of people say the right things, but people who do are ignored, right? Um, and unless we have a solution to that problem, we're always going to be capped in terms of what we can actually achieve in reality. We need people that think and talk and do.
Tell me what you think about when you're investing into startups, and we could ask it either way in terms of what you look for, or ask you
Yeah.
to give startups looking for funding, it's the same sort of
Yeah.
question. Take it as front.
So over time, I used to have a long metrics and all this stuff, and I learned over time it doesn't work. you know, um, there are many things that you can fix about a startup,
Yeah.
um, if the opportunity is big enough. But there's only one thing you can't fix, and that is, do you have an ambitious founder, right? Um, who has a unique customer insight and can to solve a really, really big problem. And if you have an ambitious founder with a unique customer insight about how to solve a really big problem, you've got a startup. Everything else you can hire, or you can provide yourself, which is what we do at Future Africa. We provide storytelling support, we provide team support, we provide operations and technology support, we provide sales support and revenue support, we provide finance, fundraising support. We can give you all of that, but I cannot make you a founder with ambition for society and a unique customer insight on how to solve a very big problem. I cannot be that for you, and I'm not that. And that's what the founder who comes to us has to be for us to be able to back that. And it's ridiculously rare.
Do you see any patterns when you come across these types of founders? Are they old? Are they young? Are they having some sort of dynamic that you sort of can pick on quite easily?
Honestly, they come in all ages. I do find though that they have spent significant time with the problem. They're not pitch deck pushers. They're not straight out of school kids. They've actually gone, worked in the industry. They've seen the problem at depth and at scale, and they understand how to solve it because of that experience. Or maybe they've lived the problem their whole life and they understand something that I don't about how to solve the problem. But they've
Yeah,
rarely ever just, very polished MBAs with a nice pitch deck. Not usually.
yeah. Do you find guys with MBAs are better or worse, or have you got no evidence in terms of those type of educational grounds versus real lived experiences?
I've largely lost money on Harvard MBAs, so I don't know.
Hey, maybe we should do that one offline, but I'm curious now.
I don't know. I think it's just my luck.
Then the next thing is once they get up and running. So obviously the first point of failure is they don't even start. The
Yeah,
second point of
they
failure
never
is
launch.
they never launch, and that's the vast majority, and that's very sad. Then they got the second level where they launch, but it's half-hearted. They give up so soon, or they
Yeah.
don't reach out for help. The number of people. Well, actually, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I'm going to ask you around that next sort of point. I see so many people having to make that choice between do they bootstrap or do they go looking for funding. Again, do you have an opinion about how people should be making that choice, or whether it's obvious in every single circumstance?
Well, the way I look at it is that it's a function of whether that capital that you're raising comes with more than money. There are certain problems that if you want to solve these problems, you need certain kinds of capital to be alongside you on the journey because it requires more political will, it requires regulatory, orchestration, it requires technical support, it requires deep industry knowledge, it requires a reputation, it requires a balance sheet. so so it really depends on the opportunity, right? It's never about the capital itself. It's never about the money itself. It's about what the money comes with. And quite frankly, if you have everything you need to build your business, you might as well bootstrap it, right? But if you think you need something extra and some capital can bring that to the table alongside some money to accelerate you on that journey, then you go for venture capital,
I
the right
worry
kind
about
of venture
people boot.
capital.
I worry about people bootstrapping because my kind of take is that um, it's not necessarily about the money; it's about the networks. So if you want to go and fulfill the criteria that you've got about solving big problems, you can't do that by yourself. And I worry that bootstrappers try to take everything on in terms of the load onto their own shoulders and try to do everything themselves, hire their own staff, do their own marketing, and they miss that
I think
opportunity of working outside.
I think what I've learned is that, it's better for you to have no capital than to have the wrong kind of capital.
Yeah, that's a lovely quote, eh?
So I I think sometimes bootstrappers are just waiting for the right capital to come along. I I don't think it's that nobody ever uh I look, I know enough bootstrappers to know that if they see an opportunity that right tallies with their business objectives and can help them scale, they will take the money. But like I said, it's better to have no money than to take money from the wrong person.
How do the startups avoid making that mistake? How do you, you're reaching out, you need help. The first guy comes along.
Well,
How can they avoid that pitfall? Is it by
well,
going
look,
with the big
you gotta be.
reaching out to you? What are the steps they need to take?
I think, look, they have to be incredibly self-aware first of all, right? Because, and I think that's the kind of bootstrapper you're talking about, the guy who
Mm,
believes is all-knowing and all-encompassing and all-wise. And if that's a founder's impression of himself and doesn't believe he needs any help, then he's just going to waste people's time, and no one needs to be around him. But
yeah.
if there is some belief, you see what I mean, in a the founder has some self-belief, but also still understands that they are short on several things, then a conversation can be had about what kind of capital they actually need. And when they put that list together, it's quite easy to vet the investor to see whether that's what they actually do or not do. The problem is many people go out to fundraise just looking for money. And yeah, that's how you end up in trouble. Because if you're just looking for money, um, you know, you'll find some.
Mhm. Interesting. Let's jump on to AI. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to get your opinion. You must get this question many, many times, several times a day. How do you actually think this is going to impact Africa? We kind of touched on this idea of, renting versus owning earlier when we were thinking about Starlink, and you kind of got the same possibilities here in terms of artificial intelligence. Do we end up being a continent which effectively rents artificial intelligence, and we end up in a situation where we end up with a net negative because it actually leads to job displacement that is difficult to rectify? Or do you think we end up with some other scenario looking forward where we actually benefit, and we benefit at scale in a way that perhaps other countries, other continents can't possibly do?
I think there's a case for both scenarios, depending on what we choose to do. I think first of all, it's just important to understand that AI is transformational technology, right? It is basically the internet. It is basically personal computing. It is basically the mobile phone. It's at that level. So anybody who comes, who you have to think of it as fundamental technology, and then think about what moves would you have made if you had seen the smartphone coming, if you had seen personal computing coming. And I think the first thing, and particularly the common thread across all of this, is talent. And there seems to be an assumption in the West that, particularly in the West, that it's easy to retrain talent on new technology than it is to create new talents. Well, history has generally proven that to be wrong, right? Um, Typists never emerged to become, word processor
Amazon.
experts.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? The
yeah, yeah.
people who used to code Java applets never became app developers. So
Yeah.
my bet is that the talent stack, AI is going to rewrite the talent stack of the internet. And that's the opportunity that Africa has. There are other things that Africa can lay claim to, whether it's renting or owning. I don't even think that matters. Like compute or like energy. I would argue we have significant capital deficiencies that make it impossible for us to compete on those things, right? But you know what? If we have the internet, right, and we have talent, we can tap into compute anywhere in the world. We don't necessarily have to own the compute to use it. I mean, we use AWS and we don't own the service. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to really have a real conversation as a continent on what we want to build and what we want to own. For me, I think we should just focus on building talent that is AI native and leave everything else for now until such
So
a
here,
time as we can afford it.
so here's a hypothesis I want to bounce off you and see what your thoughts are. I kind of came up with this as part of the article that I put into Forbes Africa every couple of weeks, and in my mind it's this plumber called Wanjiku, and it's a nightmare going around Nairobi running a business. The traffic's horrendous. You could have picked a number of cities.
Hmm.
And in this example, it's incredibly difficult to break that cycle because they've got no access to technology. Now, in this new world that we're entering, where vibe coding, so platforms like Bolt or Lovable or Replit are becoming available to every single person in the world. Certainly, if you've got internet in the cities, even if you have to go to an internet cafe or borrow someone else's computer, you can build apps literally by just talking out your ideas. And this idea would be something along the lines of, oh, this traffic's terrible. I need a mechanism where someone has a leak, they take a photo, they WhatsApp me, I can go and use AI to determine the part. We can order it immediately from some local distribution center. We can outsource to a gig economy rider to bring it round, and I'll use some of my workforce to go and install, and I'll take a commission. Building that even 6 months ago would be, as you said, $100,000 investment, right? And it just
Hmm.
immediately 90%, 99% of the ideas, not just in Africa, but particularly in Africa. So,
Hmm.
are we reaching a stage where that friction, that cost, because of these new technologies, is being eroded so quickly that we could expect to see not just hundreds, but thousands, tens, even millions of startups able to form from existing businesses because they're able to go and use technologies like this. And we don't have to go and retrain them in ways fundamentally because the natural language they use is their own language.
Hmm. Precisely. I think you get it exactly right. And the way I look at it is that AI solves a productivity problem. And we especially need that in Africa because the biggest productivity issue we have is learning. We just don't have enough teachers to be able to teach enough people what they need to know to make it. And the reality is we're going to struggle to figure that piece out, particularly because unfortunately most of AI is not encompassing our local knowledge and is not in our local languages. But these are problems that we have to fix in order to be able to extend what we have today. Um, and and there's so much opportunity in solving those types of problems, right? But we have to get to work.
I think we'll have to call it there. We've hit the time. I just want to say thank you very much, not just for your insights, but the honesty and the clarity on your answers. I kind of was expecting that actually, so I'm really happy that it was exactly the same on our little chat. So everyone that's joined live, thank you for being part of this community. If you're a founder, investor, operator, or part of the diaspora, I hope today gave you a clearer sense of where Africa's opportunities are shifting. Massive thanks to our sponsors and partners, the AWS Founders Series, AWS Silicon Overdrive. We couldn't do this without you. And thanks to Africa Arena, Chisel, FDC, Endeavor, CrossFin, Future World, Innovation City, and Henley for supporting us as well. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin. Have a wonderful day.